It is time for us to have a little look at some local history, and there is only one person we do that with, and that is Harold Peacock from History Out There. How are you, mate?
Oh, very well, thanks, Damo. Yeah, this is a 161-year-old story I'm about to tell you.
Oh, that is amazing. And it's all about Riley the Bushranger, who came to Toowoomba back in 1864.
That's right. A seemingly innocuous trial at the Toowoomba courthouse in 1864 brought together some amazing characters in Australian colonial history. Now, it was in July 1864, and the law courts across the whole colony of Queensland were overflowing. Busiest of all was the Toowoomba Assizes, where two particular men were charged with larceny. Now, this followed events on the evening of Friday, the 8th of January, 1864. That's when 4 horses with their saddles and bridles were stolen from Talavera Station, the property of W.B. Tooth, Esquire. Now, the next day, Constable Francis was dispatched along with a Mr. Bygraves to hunt the felons. Now, if you were an aspiring thief back then, these were the wrong people to cross. You see, the property owner was William Butler Tooth, who was a politician and pastoralist and a notorious litigious person. He hunted everyone down and took them to court. He had acquired runs in the Wide Bay, Burnett and Darling Downs districts, including Clifton near Uluru. Now, before Queensland separated from New South Wales, Tooth represented Queensland's Moreton, Wide Bay, Burnett, Maranoa, Leichhardt and Port Curtis districts in the New South Wales Parliament. That's a big electorate, so don't let anyone tell you about electorates today. Now, a cousin of his was the first baronet, Sir Robert Lucas Tooth,
Right.
who would later be a major backer of the Mawson Antarctic Expedition Relief Fund. Now, the men that Tooth sent in pursuit of his stolen property included Edward Leigh Bygrave, who was a lofty Englishman and superintendent of Tooth Station. And with him was Constable William Francis, who was a founding member of the Queensland Police Force. Now, he'd work in places like Surat, Roma, Warwick and Ipswich, and he'd rise through the ranks to senior sergeant and become famous for catching bushrangers. And that included the bushranger Ned Randall, who Francis tracked for over 320 miles before overtaking him. He also arrested a man believed to be the notorious Captain Thunderbolt, but he was released by a magistrate before a positive identification could be made. Now, Constable Francis and Mr. Bygraves, they went in pursuit of these stolen horses. Now, after tracking them 150 miles to within sight of the Queensland-New South Wales border, they overhauled 2 men who gave their names as William Goldfinch and Robert Faulkner. Now, Constable Francis presented his revolver and ordered them to stand. Goldfinch took off and made for the scrub, and the constable chased him. Mr. Bygraves faced Faulkner and promised to shoot him if he didn't surrender. So Faulkner surrendered. Now, it was at the Toowoomba courthouse on Saturday, the 16th of July, 1864, before Justice Alfred Lutwich, who was the first judge of the Supreme Court of Queensland, that the charges were heard. Goldfinch and Faulkner were accused of horse stealing at Roma. They pleaded guilty and were sentenced to a relatively lenient 2 years hard labour in Brisbane jail. The horses back then were so highly valued, you just didn't take a man's horse. That was his livelihood. So normally a lot heavier sentences. In fact, on this occasion, Justice Lutwich, he warned that if they came before him again, he would show no mercy and sentence them to a minimum of 5 years hard labour in the road gangs. But anyway, after serving this 2-year sentence, it appears that Goldfinch got as far away from Justice Lutwich as he could and moved to South Australia. His only disturbance there came when his plough was reported stolen by a cow, because it seems the cow got her horns caught in the handles. The cow and plough then rolled down an embankment together for a swift getaway. But that's all we heard of him after the Toowoomba event. Goldfinch's partner in crime, Robert Faulkner, proved somewhat more interesting. You see, the name Robert Faulkner was an alias used by the notorious John Burns, alias Shields, alias George Brownlow, alias Phillips, alias George Dixon, alias Riley the Bushranger, alias the Hairy Man.
Right.
Now, that's because later in his career he was invariably described as as a very dirty man with a profusion of unkempt hair over his face and trailing down his back.
Right.
Now, confusion over the bushranger's identity would lead to the wrong man being shot dead and an innocent man being sentenced to 2 concurrent sentences of 15 years hard labour. Now, Faulkner, Burns, Riley the Bushranger, the hairy man, or whatever his name was, it appears he first faced justice in the Toowoomba courthouse in 1864, and the bushranging career of the hairy man could well have been nipped in the bud if only his Toowoomba sentence was not so lenient.
What a story. I'll tell you what, that could be an epic movie, I reckon.
Oh, look, the imagery of the hairy man jumping out and holding up, that's definitely a scene to start a classic film, isn't it?
It's a bit like, spotting Bigfoot in the bushes, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Well, just look out for Toowoomba, the ghost of the hairy man may still be walking the street.
You never know. And I've probably seen him a couple of times. But anyway, mate, that story, you'll be posting that up on your website?
Absolutely. You go to the website, historyouthere.com, and I think there's 51 stories I've told you about from Granite Belt and Darling Downs. They're all there, historyouthere.com.
Fantastic, mate. We'll look forward to catching up with you again next week.
I look forward to it.
Thank you so much for that. There he is, Harold Peacock, joining us there with historyouthere.com. Check out the website and you'll be able to relive that story and many others.